Thank you all for coming. I think I recognize most all the faces here, but I do see a few new ones. Come on up. I'm just starting to get things moving. So Jeff Sachs is our speaker today.
Do we have audio?
He is...
not on there, no.
We need some speakers.
Yeah. Robin, do we have speakers?
It's sort of 30 minutes in. If we see, we'll see if people want it or not. Okay.
Okay.
So,
How loud can you get it on there? We're small groups.
I might be able to. Yeah, I suppose that's possible. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No problem. No problem at all. This is Jeff Sachs. It's really a pleasure to have you along, Jeff. For all of you, he's a professor specializing in labor economics, public economics, urban economics, published papers on the effects of residential segregation on the black labor market behaviors, the effect of unions in the local sector, wages, employment, and expenditures, and the effects of regulation on the rate of unionization. All that said, his title is Student Expertise in the Legislative Process. And so we're going to have a conversation about that until 1 o'clock. And Jeff said to me that making this interactive is wonderful as well. So we'll let you direct us through and navigate through the next hour.
Thank you.
So, thank you all for coming.
Yes, thanks for coming. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm not entirely sure where I am, so what that means, I think, is that I have a presentation organized here, but I'll be happy to take guidance from you as to what you find useful and what you find less interesting. So what brought me here was a solicitation from somebody on your staff regarding my class Economics 4231. Economics 4231 is Applied Economic Analysis and Public Policy. So it's a course where I take up-level undergraduates and I instruct them in the economic principles that should govern government behavior. And then we follow the Colorado State Assembly. We read bills and we write about them and we testify about it. So the way I've organized the presentation, and this may not even constitute organization by your standards, but what I thought I would do is quickly summarize the principles that drive the course and drive the way we think about things, then give you an example applied to a specific bill, and then then say a little bit more about how the course itself is organized and how the students actually interact with policymakers. And then I would finish by going through the list of projects that are associated with your center on your homepage and tell you what we would think about them all by our standards. So that's what I got in mind. All right, so ask questions throughout, and if I'm doing stuff that doesn't seem all that interesting, let me know, and we'll move on to whatever's next, okay? Good.
Yes. This is a small group, and you had said you didn't really know the audience. Would you like everybody to just introduce themselves real quickly? So
in some ways that would be cool, but I don't think I retain anything. I guess I'm more concerned about what you think you're going to get out of this. So if you want to go around and talk about what you think you get out of this, that might help me.
It's up to you.
Yeah. I'm sure it'll reveal itself. Let's go ahead.
Okay. All
right, so when should government not get involved? And that's the primary graph. This is the Edgeworth box in the 2x2 economy, 2 consumers, 2 goods. And on the one hand, this looks kind of simple, it's just 2-dimensional. At the same time, there are a lot of graphs on it. There's at least one Nobel Prize associated with this stuff, with, well, the multi-dimensional elaboration of this. But what this graph supports is the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics. That sounds like a big deal, right? And you can read it. Preferences locally non-satiated, and so forth, right? Any wall raised in equilibrium allocation is Pareto optimal. That's the punchline. What does that actually mean? Well, I think of this as the Little Bo Peep theorem. Leave them alone and they'll come home. In other words, there's a ton of wisdom in Little Bo Peep. There are, I think, a lot of what defines a life well lived in almost any domain is knowing when not to get involved, knowing when just let things take their natural course. And what the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics says is that under specified conditions, there's no need for government. That is, not only is there no need for government, but you can rely on individuals behaving in their own self-interest to sort of squeeze all the value there is out of the resources that are available. Government doesn't need to be involved. And why put the effort in if people can handle it themselves? Right? So that's another way of saying it. Under ordinary circumstances, the government can't improve on what individuals, without coordination, would find themselves doing. All right? Now, So that's a fantastic result. As I said, there's at least part of Ken Arrow's Nobel Prize comes from this result. Now, but with regard to most theorems in economics, what's really interesting about this is not the result, but rather the conditions that need to be obtained in order for the result to hold. All right, so here's what what ordinary circumstances look like. All goods are private. Right? What that means is, like lunch, and we speak of lunch in a very private terms, right? Because we say, I'm eating your lunch, right? That means that I'm depriving you of something, right? That is, only one person can eat the lunch, and if one person eats it, the other person can't. So if I eat your lunch, that's actually a fairly dramatic thing to do, right? And it's typically a substantial reduction in your feeling of welfare. All right, so the first fundamental theorem requires that all goods be private, that there are no non-pecuniary externalities. That is, that your eating of your lunch does not materially affect my sense of well-being, right? Which, as a first-order assumption, doesn't seem that offensive, right? Although, if what you had for lunch was nicer than what I had for lunch, I might feel a diminution in my sense of well-being because the relative comparison is disturbing to me. That would be an externality, but that's a second-order effect. And third, there are no market imperfections. That is, any trade that people want to indulge in, any trade that people want to voluntarily participate in, is allowed. Right. So those are the conditions that are required in order to conclude that there's no role for government. And as a consequence, if you just flip them, they explain the role for government. The role for government is when we have public good. Now, public good is it's a good that, technically speaking, is non-rival and non-excludable. Right? What that means is that if I consume it, it doesn't affect your ability to consume it, and moreover, you can't prevent me from consuming it. So, a conventional example of a public good is, for example, national defense. That is, the U.S. military doesn't defend me differentially from its defense of you, right? And there's no way, as long as I'm a citizen resident of this country, that the military can go out and not defend me. You can choose. So that's a public good. Maybe a more immediate example of a public good is, for most purposes, the roads are an example of public good. If you get on the roads, naturally, this doesn't hold at rush hour, but ordinarily, if you start driving, it doesn't really affect my ability to drive, and I don't really have any way of preventing you from getting out to drive, except, of course, on toll roads. And those are all sort of interesting elaborations on it. But roads are, for another example of a public good. To turn it around the other way, imagine that roads were a private good. Imagine we were each responsible for building a road in front of our house. That wouldn't work so well, right? You can think of a lot of reasons why that wouldn't work. All right. So there's government. When government internalizes non-pecuniary externalities, right? So the externality we already talked about, that is when someone else's behavior sort of affects my well-being, right? But what makes it non-pecuniary is that it's not behavior that can be mediated through the market. So the classic example of non-pecuniary externalities is air pollution, for example, right? If someone's smokestack is belching fumes into the air, and I agree with them, that's a problem, right? That's a problem for me. And I can't very well, or at least, depending on what the legal regime is, I may not have the ability to go to these people and say, you're doing something that hurts me and you have to stop, right? Or rather, the ability to say that is an example of the government taking an externality, a non-pecuniary externality, and dealing with it appropriately. All right, but the tricky thing here is there's between the pecuniary and the non-pecuniary externality. So let's talk about that for a moment. All right, lots of times what people do affects you, right? So, for example, you're eating right now, right? If I hadn't eaten, I might be thinking, "Boy, this is really annoying," right? And I might want you to stop eating. So that's a non-pecuniary externality, right? But I could say, you know what? I know how much it annoys me. I will pay you $5 to stop eating. And you would say, okay. Right. Now it's a pecuniary externality. That is, you're doing something that affects me, but we've negotiated a contract, which means we're both satisfied with the outcome, and that's fine, right? That's a pecuniary externality, and that was resolved in the market. So actually, I got a great insight into this. probably 10 years ago, 15 years ago, my dad came to visit. My dad's sort of a ornery guy, and we were driving in the car, and I had the air conditioning on, he had the window on. I said, don't do that. And he said, why? And I said, because you're wasting gas. And he said, how much gas? And this was actually a great moment in both my adulthood and his adulthood, because instead of just sort of arguing with each other, like, you're wasting gas, how much? I actually he said, how much gas? I thought about, well, over the weekend it's probably $5 worth of gas. He said, okay. Opened up his wallet and gave me $5. And I thought, well, that's resolved. So we drove for the whole weekend with the air conditioning on and the window open. So that was an externality that was internalized, right? That was internalized through a market transaction, okay? That's fine. The government doesn't need to be involved in that. So what the government's role with regard to externalities are, for example, to internalize them, to either make them the subject of a reasonable market transaction, or in the case of air pollution, where there's not always a convenient way to do that, because you have to identify all the people who are breathing in this crappy air, and negotiate side payments so that everyone was happy with the situation. Sometimes you say, you know what, that's just too hard, I'm going to regulate it. All right? That's another way of internalizing externality, and that's a legitimate thing for government to do. And finally, when the government eliminates market imperfections, that is, when the government says, look, there's a deal that people want to make, but they're not allowed to. And there's no reason why they shouldn't be allowed to accept this market imperfection, probably to someone's advantage. But let's open it up so people can make all the deals they want, and then things will be better. All right? So the very same, the Nobel Prize-winning theorem, which explains how individuals without coordination can squeeze all the value out of the resources available, you just flip it around, and that very same theorem explains to you when you need government, right? These are all relevant experiences to human life, and we need government. And when the government interacts in these ways, it has the opportunity, assuming it does the right thing, it has the opportunity to improve welfare in a very precise sense that I won't explain here, but in a very precise sense. If nothing else, this guarantees that things can be improved to the point where everybody could be made better off. And they may not be, depending on how things actually get done, right? But when the government addresses the world in these domains and does the right thing, it improves the welfare opportunities for everybody. Whether or not it improves the welfare outcomes requires a little more thought. So this stuff is good. All right, now, anything else the government might do is redistribution. All right, so these first three things, the government is creating the opportunity for everyone to be better off. Anything else is redistribution, and redistribution, by definition, is not making everyone better off, or not even creating the possibility of making everyone better off. Redistribution is taking from one and giving to another. That's what redistribution is. Okay? And it's not that government should never redistribute, it's rather that when it redistributes, it needs an entirely different set of justifications for it. These first three things are easy to justify. We are creating opportunity for everybody, right? The fourth thing requires a completely different discussion, because you're explicitly not, you are hurting somebody to help someone else. And so the conversation that has to go around, or that should go around in the act of redistribution is, well, the people we're hurting, in some sense, aren't going to feel it too badly, and the people we're helping are, in some sense, deserving and will really benefit. But those are the kinds of conversations that you need to have if you want to legitimately engage in redistribution. Okay, so that's the form, that's the foundation for the class. So examples of appropriate government behavior: public good, providing transportation infrastructure, a non-pecuniary externality, regulating environmental contaminants; market failure, enforcing antitrust regulations. Right? These are all, when the government says we're going to think about doing these things, we say, bully. Go right ahead. These are the domains in which you should be acting. It doesn't mean you should always be doing it. For example, we're not saying that you should build any road that's possible, right? But what we are saying is that when government talks about trying to optimize transportation infrastructure, that's appropriate behavior for the government. In the same way that when I talk about writing a paper about the role of unions in the public sector, that's an appropriate thing for me to be doing. On the other hand, if I say I feel like I'm going to write a paper about Chaucer and Chaucer's influence on on the development of on linguistical evolution in the English language, that's an inappropriate thing for me to be doing because I don't have any skill at it, right? So that's what we're trying to say here, all right? The way the course is designed basically is, let me go back, is we spend about 6 weeks making this a reflex, so that students know that this is the rubric. When you see a bill in the assembly, you go down the checklist. Is it 1? Is it 2? Is it 3? Or is it 4? And that sets you in the frame. That's the first thing you decide about whether or not the government is about to embark on a discussion that is relevant to itself. And then once you've decided which category it's in, then you can say, all right, within this category, does this proposed activity make sense for what the goals of that category of activity might be? So here's an example that comes up a lot. If you go to the Colorado State Assembly and look at the bills, there's roughly 650 to 700 bills a session. And if you look at them, you'll see over and over again, this bill will create jobs. And to the extent that you hear our presidential candidates saying anything at all about policy, they talk about how we need to create jobs. Now, is that a legitimate function of government? And the answer is, well, if you're creating jobs for the purposes of building roads that need to be built, okay. If you're creating jobs for the purposes of regulating air pollution that needs to be regulated, fine. If you're creating jobs for the purpose of making sure that the big banks don't collude to screw all us little people, that's a good thing. But creating jobs purely for the sake of creating jobs, it's not a public good. It's not an externality. It's not a market failure. Is it an externality? And that's the conversation we have to have. Go ahead.
So this is a very microeconomics focused framing. So I guess I usually think of micro and macroeconomics as being fairly distinct, but would you take the same, so like, does the government have a role in setting interest rates? Is that...
Yes. And in fact, it's a good question. Does
that fit into this framework?
Yes.
Yeah.
And similarly, when we hit the Great Recession, did the government have a role in stabilizing demand there, which had, of course, the consequence of limiting the unemployment? And the answer is absolutely, right? But that was a different. But what the government was responding to there actually was a public good. It was preserving a public good, and the increase in employment was a corollary of that. So what's the public good? Well, think about what happened. So, we'll talk briefly about the Great Recession. Okay. Think about how much of your economic life depends on trust. How many of you get paid after you did the work? Almost everybody, right? Almost everybody, and lots of people. Not us, but lots of people get paid months after they did the work, right? Why do you do that? Why would you ever, put yourself on the line like that and then wait to get paid? And the answer is, you believe, right? You have trust, all right? And as you can see, most of the time it doesn't work, because when I say to you how many of you do your work before you get paid for it, probably most of you hadn't really even thought of it that way, right? Because it's not an issue, okay? Well, when the Great Recession hits, guess what? It's an issue, right? You do your work, and you don't have any idea whether the entity for which you did the work is going to be around long enough to be able to pay you, right? It becomes a huge issue. And so what does that mean? It means the economy grinds to a halt, because people start demanding payment in advance, and they do less work unless they can get paid in advance. So in a small recession like we had in 2000, 2001, it's not really a big issue. It's relatively isolated. In fact, Colorado didn't even have a recession, although we don't admit that to ourselves. But we didn't have a recession. So in a small recession, that's it hits some isolated sectors. Some people suffer. Everybody else sort of motors along the way they usually did. Government doesn't really have to step in. And in fact, in 2001, government violated the Bo-Peep theorem, which was something they should definitely have left alone, and we didn't. Right? So even Republicans in many ways have an exaggerated sense of when government activity is appropriate. And George W. Bush certainly did in that circumstance. But in the Great Recession, what we saw was the economy grinding to a halt. That is, we saw anything related to the financial sector, and think about who that is. There are lots of businesses that actually have lines of credit. That is, they pay their workers now, knowing they're going to get paid by whoever they sold to in 2 months, and they have lines of credit. Well, those lines, if the bank's who gives you the lines of credit is going out of business, and you don't have that line of credit, how do you mediate between your workers who need to get paid now and your customers who are not going to pay for 2 months? And not only that, your customers, they're suffering as well. So in fact, they're not paying in 2 months. They're paying in 3 months and now 4 months. Well, in the Great Recession, that became so endemic that the fundamental trust, which allows us to, which allows us to run the economy at a very, very basic level. I actually had this conversation this week with a friend of mine. What's this? Good. Green. Right? And I can take this green paper, this green piece of paper, right? Right now, go to the corner at Starbucks, and I can get a large quantity of delicious, nutritional food, and I can walk away with a whole armful of stuff and leave them with a piece of green paper. Do you ever think about that? I mean, that is miraculous, right? It's miraculous. I actually, a couple weeks ago, I talked to the Libertarian department, Libertarian Party of Boulder, and I really pissed them off because I said, fiat money, and Don Giovanni, Mozart's Don Giovanni, are the two great accomplishments of civilization. And they were willing to go with the Don Giovanni, but fiat money really fries them. I thought, yeah, why is fiat money? Fiat money is just money that the government declares, right? Where does it say that? Somewhere here it says, this is legal tender. Yeah, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. So the government says that. That's the only thing that distinguishes this piece of green paper from the piece of green paper that your kid brings home from first grade, where they've colored in, what they think of as money, right? How does this work? How does this work? And the answer is trust. The amount of trust that goes into managing, into just our daily economic life is extraordinary. Well, when the Great Recession happens, that trust is eroded. And it's not because people become mendacious, it's because the circumstances were such that they couldn't fulfill that trusting contract. And so for the government to step in and say, you can trust us. We will spend money, and you know for sure we're going to do it. We're going to spend $1 trillion, and you know for sure we're going to do it. So, you can tell your bank, yes, I'm not going to get paid for 2 months, but it's the government that's going to pay me, and so you can be sure I'm going to get paid in 2 months. And so you as the bank, you can make that loan because you know I'm going to be able to pay it back. The government, when the government stepped in, it wasn't about reinstating employment. It was in reconstituting the public good of trust. And absolutely,
So that's the enterprise of the Fed is.
Sorry?
The enterprise of the Fed, all of what the Fed does is.
They play an important role that way. A lot of what happened is that the $1 trillion that was spent, that was fiscal policy.
Right,
so that was the legislative and the executive branch. But yeah, the Fed, and in fact, if anything, the Fed is more focused on trust than anybody else, because what the libertarians will say about fiat money is that, you print the money and they just print all, you print it all and then the value of it goes down. Well, it turns out debasing the currency starts long before fiat money. You can debase gold coins too, because you just sort of blend a little brass in and all of a sudden it's sort of not the coin you thought it was, but you don't necessarily know that, right? So, of course, the temptation to violate that trust, take advantage of people's trust, exists for everyone, including the government. And one of the things you have to say about our Federal Reserve recently is that they've been really, really cautious about that, and I think they're caught in a surprising position where they really want to protect that trust, and they've done so, but they've been shocked at how much money they can print and still retain that trust. But while they're doing it, money's just lubricant. This money's just lubricant, and yeah, it's good to be greased. So, all right. So anyhow, so in that, from a macroeconomic perspective, you can see the government engaging in that way. But that's not what we're really talking about here. Most of what you're going to see the state government doing is, we're going to put some money in this business over here because that'll generate 300 jobs. We're going to put some money in here that'll generate 200 jobs, right? And is that an appropriate role for the government? And it's always justified as an externality because they'll say, then there's a multiplier. Right? That is, we're going to give $1 million to this company. They're going to create $100 jobs, and those 100 people, they're going to go out and they're going to buy stuff they wouldn't have bought otherwise. So they go to the store and they're going to buy stuff, and that means the storekeeper is going to have to hire some new people to supply all the goods that these 100 people are going to buy, and that means the storekeeper is going to hire these new people, and they're going to get paid, and they're going to buy more money, more things, and so the stores that they buy, somebody else is going to have to hire more people to service them, and it's like astonishing. It's like you start with 100 jobs, and when it's all over, isn't that great? That's basically the line you get from that. All right, and it's bullshit. It's bullshit. And part of the reason, there's two things wrong with that. First, these are not, these are not non-pecuniary externalities, these are pecuniary externalities. That is, when my 100 people go out to your store and buy stuff from you, it's not as if you're all of a sudden breathing better air than you were before, you're actually getting money, right? So the money's being transacted. So the market's taking care of all this, but moreover, that fable that the legislators like to tell themselves and that the lobbyists really like to give them sort of intravenously if they can, right? That fable is missing some very important things, which is that when you give me $1 million and I go out and hire 100 people, I just raised demand for labor. And what that means is I've raised the equilibrium wage for labor, and that means all my competitors who are not getting this $1 million from the state, they're all now paying higher wages, right? Oops, right? That's a problem for them. And that means because they have to pay higher wages, they are now employing fewer people. So yes, I've got 100 more, but somewhere else in the economy, it's like excess gas. It's got to come out somewhere. It doesn't. So they're employing fewer people, and now they are employing 80 people less because I'm employing 100 people more, and those 80 people, they are now buying less from the store, so the same store that's employing more people to service my employees is firing people because they no longer have to service the employees of this person who aren't there anymore. And so all these effects, and the market works those things out. So, and of course, that part of the story is well beyond the grasp of any politician, much less a politician at the state level, and so they never see it. So they get through here. They get what's on this page. They get how this is a really great idea, and then they miss all this stuff here about actually, no, the market is going to sort this all out, and you can pretty much guarantee that you will have no net effect on the economy as a whole. All right, so if you're not remedying an externality here, then what are you doing? When you subsidize a company, you're redistributing. And then you have to ask, does this company have some claim on our sympathies? And the answer is almost invariably no. So here's an example. Here's an example that I'm really engaged with, so it comes up a lot. Tax incentives, and that actually is the formal name for the story I just told, which basically is that you give money to an individual company, all right? We don't need to worry about the details. Do tax incentives provide public goods? As I said, if you're giving a company $1 million and they promise to hire 100 people, no. The beneficiaries are, by definition, individual agents. Do they internalize non-pecuniary externalities? No. Do they remedy market imperfections? No. They create market imperfections. That is, you've improperly given an advantage to the beneficiary of your bill, right, that they didn't earn for themselves. So, often justifies for externalities. We just sort of talked that through. So there are distortions. Redistribution. Here's an example. All right, so this is going to be hard to read. All right, concerning the creation. So this is an example of a bill introduced at the in the Colorado State Assembly in 2015, and I believe this bill passed. A bill for an act concerning the creation. Is this format familiar to you? This is what bills look like. If you go on the Assembly website, this is what they all look like. So there's the title at the bottom, concerning the creation of the Innovative Industries Workforce Development Program. Who could possibly object? Let's say those words again because they're so round and delicious, right? Concerning the creation of the Innovative Industries Workforce Development Program. I mean, are there any cliches that aren't in that title? I can't think of them. All right, so that's what we're going to do. Sounds pretty good, right? Redistribution to the unneedy. All right, so here, so first, look, innovative industries have high projected growth rates and are a critical component of the state sector, economic development and job creation. Okay, forget the second clause. Innovative industries have high projected growth rates, right? What's the immediate response to that?
Give them more.
Why do they need our help? Right? The first question. So the very first thing the bill says is, why do we need our help? They're doing fine, right? Now, critical component of state economic development and job creation. The legislators don't know that. So that's just filler. Finding qualified employees can be a challenge for innovative industry businesses. Think about that for a moment. Businesses have trouble finding qualified employees. What do you think that probably means? They're not paying enough. That would ordinarily be the diagnosis here, right? And who has that problem? Everyone, right? Everyone would prefer to have better employees for the amount they're currently paying. Isn't that right? All right, so the very first statement is the beneficiaries of this bill don't deserve it. The second statement is we're going to give it to them because they have a problem that everybody else has as well, right? All right, so you can see we're not making a lot of progress here. And now we're going to have internships. Internships create opportunities for business to find, train, and evaluate potential long-term employees, and for students to get real-world experience while exploring career options. Is there anything to argue about there? And the answer is no, right? So what's the right response? So the right response is that means the businesses and the employees and the potential employees, they have plenty of private incentive to find a way to get to each other, right? I read this paragraph and I think this is telling you exactly why you don't need government involved here, because there's plenty of private incentive for this to happen without us bothering, without us wasting time and effort. But then somehow all this stuff comes together by offering incentives to businesses to create internships. Again, the predicate is that we've already been told that they already have plenty of incentives because they don't have. So why we need to offer more incentives? I don't know. The state will encourage businesses to create more opportunities. That's probably true for students to obtain work experience in the innovative industries. All right, it is probably true that if you put more money in, they will hire more people. But again, we haven't established any kind of foundation for the assertion that somehow they can't do it on their own, or the extent to which they're doing it isn't in any important sense enough. All right, so it gets worse. You can see innovative industries. Okay, what's an innovative? So this, I will admit, I extracted this from another talk I've given. These kinds of incentives are wrong for a variety of reasons, and that's what the totals get. That even if they made sense formally, even if they made sense in principle, the way they're put into practice is always guaranteed to fail. But just the same. So what's an innovative industry? Okay, advanced manufacturing. Don't know what that means, but maybe. Aerospace, bioscience, fine, construction, electronics, oops. Construction, construction, gotcha. I'm sure there are advanced things going on in construction, but it's hard to think of construction as an advanced industry because we know we've been doing it since the Neolithic period, if not before. So I don't quite know where that comes from, but some lobbyist earned his money. All right, electronics and energy and natural resources, engineering and information technology industries. And here's the great phrase. Can anybody see the last part? And any other innovative industry as determined by the department. The department of, I don't remember who was going to be administrating this. All right, so what do we got, right? So innovative could be anything, which in some sense makes sense because the people who are legislators are in no position to really know what is and is not innovative at any particular moment in the development of the economy. So maybe they were doing the right thing by just saying, could be anything, because we sure don't know what it would be. All right, so that's good. And here's the kinds of occupations they'll support. Computer systems, software development, fine. Production, including fabrication, assembly, quality assurance, engineering, business, finance, customer service, sales. If there is such a thing as the leading edge of the economy, I don't think we're getting there very closely, right? Installation, maintenance, and repair of machinery and equipment. Perfectly honorable things to make a career out of, right? But leading edge, I'm not seeing it. Okay, so after all this stuff, what are they actually going to do? And the answer is, here, they're going to reimburse each business for up to 5 interns and up to 10 interns total. The maximum amount will be reimbursed is $5,000, at least half of which has to be paid through reimbursement to the intern. So they're allowing half of this grant to remain with the employer as administrative whatever, and in the end, they're going to spend $450,000. So after all this, they're financing 90 internships. So this is a bill, you may not know what the process, this is the way bills get done here is, first someone drafts them, we've seen that, right? Then they get read in the House in which they're in. This was the House, not the Senate. So they get read in the House all votes. Then they send it on to a committee. If the committee likes it, it may go to another committee, it may come right back to the House, and it comes back to the House, gets voted on twice more, then it goes to the Senate. The Senate does the same thing, they read it once, if they like it, they send it to a committee, it comes back, they vote on it twice more, and then if the versions that come out of 2 houses are different, then they get together and they reconcile them, then they vote on them all over again. Think about the man hours that goes into that, right? And when it was all over, they're going to fund 90 internships. And do you think they know who's getting those internships even now? And the answer is right from the beginning. Right from the beginning. These like 5 companies who came to somebody and said, it would really be great if you would pay for our interns. And the guy said, I'm a legislator. I think we can do that. Whether I should or not, it's not my concern. So that's where this bill came from. And this is typical of the kind of crap we see. And so we, as you can see, we're pretty negative about it. And so, in general, these things are terrible. These things are terrible economics. First, as I said, they don't address, they're all redistribution. They're usually redistributed to the unneedy. Moreover, then there's the idea that someone in the government is actually going to know how to spend this money wisely. And the first thing that's wrong with that, if you actually knew where the leading edge of the economy was and where the greatest profits were to be made, you wouldn't give that information away for free, and you wouldn't be working for the government. So, almost by definition, the government is going to misallocate this money. Right? The only people who could do it right wouldn't be there, right? Always always zero-sum games. The very bottom. Can tax expenditures be fixed? Here's my suggestion. If you introduce a bill of this nature, you have to be willing to put your own money down as part of an investment in the enterprise to back it up. That may be one way to get a start. Anyhow, so that's an example of the way we think about things. All right. Now here's how the course actually runs. So economics 4231 and Granby says, as I said, policy rectification. That's claiming a little more for us than we actually achieve, but it's sort of our ambition, right? So here's what we do. So we work through in much greater detail, of course, the principles of how government should behave. And then the students in the course of the semester, they choose to get 4 bills. For each bill, they write a 5-page economic analysis. And this usually goes through 3 drafts, but it can go up to 4. I have to cap it at 4 because sometimes they just don't converge. And so they go for, the reason they have to redraft is because first, I noticed the program for writing is right across the street. It's a mystery what they do. My seniors come to me and they cannot write. So, and most of the time they don't really care. We just give a grade and we let it go. But the problem here is these are going to be public documents. So when they finish, if their final draft reaches the minimum as a standard, then the next step is they distribute it to all the members of the relevant committees of the assembly, at which point it is a public document. We have no control over where it's going to go. So, it's got to hit some minimum standard. Similarly, if it hits that minimum standard, they then give a presentation in class. They write a 3-minute oral presentation, and they give it in class. And this is the only class I've ever used presentations in. I think they're a total waste of time. I think presentations, the person who does it may get something out of it. The audience never gets anything out of it. The reason I do it in this class is because, once again, they are preparing to actually present in front of the assembly. And they need, even to the extent that the assembly understands that they don't actually represent the University of Colorado, nevertheless, we have an interest both in using the assembly's time wisely and in making sure that we establish, in some sense, a brand that has some credibility to it. So they practice their presentation 3 minutes with a stopwatch in class, and then of the 4 bills they're required, it's 20% of their grade, they testify twice. And the reason they testify on 2 is because maybe you do, but most of us don't have any idea how chaotic the assembly schedule is. And coordinating testimony with their class and their other obligations is virtually impossible. So 2 out of 4 is 80%. 80% of them get 2 out of 4. 80 to 90% of them get 2 out of 4. And it's not because they're not trying, because you can't go to this course without trying. It's because and they'll go down there, they'll be on the schedule at the beginning of the day, say, we're going to talk about this bill. They'll go all the way down there, and they'll wait for 3 hours, and the committee will say, you know what, I guess we aren't going to talk about this bill after all. That happens. I had a student once who was running on a gun bill, and you can imagine what that was like. She got there, the committee meeting started at 2. She got there at 1, I think, put her name on. She left at 1 in the morning and had not testified. Oh. So, and I can't give credit for that. I mean, that's the legislative game. And part of what they are learning is, how to interact with the practicalities of what this happens. So that's what each student does. And then at the very end, at the end of the session, we do a legislative report card where we actually go through every bill. We have a rubric that embodies these principles. We go through every bill and we grade them all, and then we only actually got there for the first time at the end of the last semester, and we make an announcement about it, and I need to work on that a little bit because 2 things went wrong there. We made the announcement at the end of the semester, which was actually a week after the assembly had closed. The assembly session was closed, and no one cared anymore, so that was unfortunate. But the other thing is we went to the university press people, and they were really happy to publicize this throughout the university and had no interest in showing the rest of the world what we thought, because they thought it would be perhaps inflammatory. And so I'm changing the course. We're going to do a midterm report in March, and we're going to ignore the university press people because they think their mission is not to upset the assembly, and that may well be. But I think our mission is to educate the state, and so I'm going to see if I can get it out there beforehand. But so that's what the course looks like. And what I was going to do here, I don't know if this is going to work or not. I actually have this particular bill. So I have, as an example, I have all the testimonies recorded, and I have the testimony. This was John Logan Brock, who was turned out to be the outstanding graduating senior of this past year's class. We have the recording of his testimony, followed by the questions that are asked by the assembly members. And I've got the link to that. I don't know if we can actually make that audible. This was another really stupid bill, of which there are many, right? So this was, again, we're going to make it easier to send your kids to college. So if you put your money in the college invest, that special savings thing the state arranges will increase your tax deductions. And here's what they were going to do. So if your income was $150,000 or less, you could deduct twice what you put into the program off your taxes. And then if your income was between $150,000 to $250,000, you could deduct 150%. So if your income was above $250,000, then your deduction is actually limited. So basically, for everyone whose income was under $250,000, this was going to increase the quality value of the deduction. If you were above that, you were going to reduce the value of your deduction. So what's wrong with this bit? You would say naively, and of course, naive is as far as the assembly gets, makes college more affordable for those with lower incomes. Not wrong, right? But what's lower incomes? $250,000. Guess what proportion of the workforce gets paid $250,000 or less? 97, 96, 98%. Yeah, the number can vary, but basically, this is essentially everyone, okay? And of them, who do you think of as being poor? And the answer is, I'm in here. I don't think of myself as being poor. When you think about the people who are really struggling to pay for a college education, it's not those with $250,000 worth of income. And so, but by subsidizing so many of them, and not only that, these richer people are much more likely to take up the benefit because they're more likely to send their kids to college in the first place. They're more likely to be aware that there is a state-sponsored tax advantage savings program in which they can participate. They're more likely to have the experience of dealing with financial instruments and such that they feel like they're comfortable putting their money into this thing called college invest that they can't see and they can't visit. Right? So basically, where are all these benefits going? And the answer is, these benefits are going to go right here, right among these people who are essentially in the top 20% of the income distribution. That's where they're going to go. So this is redistribution to the unneedy. So first, this is clearly redistributive. And second, once you understand that it's redistributive, then the question is, do the people who are getting the benefit, do they need it in any meaningful sense? And the answer here is no. So this was another dumb bill that John was willing to take on and talk about in public. So we have here a link to his 2.5-minute testimony. What's interesting is sometimes when they testify, the chairman of the committee says, "Thank you very much," and they move right on. Sometimes when they testify, they get asked a couple of questions. Sometimes when they testify, they become the fulcrum of a partisan debate. And I've had students who are on the stand for 30 minutes after giving a 3-minute discussion, as each side tries to ask questions through my student to go the other way. So, and it's completely unpredictable what's going to happen. In this case, a couple of questions were asked, and we're kind of not with enough time, so I'm not going to do that. Yes?
Just a quick question. The students are just signing up as a member of the public.
Yes.
Anyone can sign up.
Anyone can do that. In fact, among the long-standing pedagogical rules that I've had for myself that I violated for this course is I have a field trip, which, again, this is college, not kindergarten. What do you do with a field trip, right? Well, the answer is that we go down to the legislature, we walk through the building, last year when we did this, the president of the Senate was standing on the floor there. He invited us down and started chatting to us about, and then the senator from Denton Boulder showed up and he started chatting with people about his career. So that was all very nice, but the point of it is to demystify the experience of testifying, because actually that in a bill that has some controversy, that's actually quite challenging, because you go down there, it's a big building, people are moving around, they're running, there's all sorts of confusion. There is a piece of paper where you put your name down, and in a sense, the process is simple. You sign a piece of paper, and then you go and wait, right? But there's enough stuff going around that if you didn't actually have some exposure in advance to where the piece of paper was going to be and where you would sit and so forth, and there aren't a lot of people who can ask Because everyone there except you is paid to be there, right? So they figured it out, but you haven't. So it turns out that, and the students have this experience. Their first reaction is, this is pretty Mickey Mouse. We're wasting 3 hours on a field trip, and then 2 months later they'll say to me, "That was so helpful. That was so helpful because when I went down, it's freaky enough." And I'm about to get out there in front of six adult legislators and tell them that that they have no idea what they're wasting the taxpayers' money with. I'm kind of anxious, and it's nice to have that settled down. So yes, and these are public hearings. These are public hearings, anyone can testify. We have become, I think, what's my next? So we have become, I think, the most prominent and consistent source of nonpartisan economic advice that the Assembly hears. We've been doing this course. I've been doing this course for 5 or 6 years now, and there's no question the Assembly members expect my students, and they even notice them. And in fact, there's a recording from several years ago of the chairman of a committee, I think it was Lois Court, saying, "Thank you for your testimony, and please thank Professor Zaps for sending one of his students to us to tell us once again, which seems like the only thing he really wants to say to us, that we are wasting taxpayers' money." That's on the public record. And we don't. It's not. In the end, we probably testify on somewhere between 50 and 30 bills out of the 650 or 700, depending on how many students I have. But everyone else they hear from is paid or has a personal stake in whatever stupidity they're considering. And so our testimony is unusual. And then we finished with the legislative report card. So here's what we had to do. Here's what we did. We went through all 700 bills. We went through each, is it a public good? Is it an externality? Is it a market imperfection? Is it redistribution? And so forth. 46% had the potential to do what government should do. All right. However, 4% would have probably discouraged the provision of public goods. That would have said, that national defense thing you're so concerned about, why don't you just skip that? Or roads or whatever, right? 13% would have been probably increased market imperfections. That is, it would have said, for example, I really think that painting polish on nails embodies the potential of such a threat to health and well-being that we need to make sure that people who put polish on nails have had a 1.5 years of training and 40 consecutive days of supervised work before they're ever let out to put polish on nails. Right? That's a market imperfection, right? That is where the government is prohibiting people from engaging in activity where the harm they could possibly do is so limited that there's really no justification for prohibition. 6% would have redistributed wealth in favor of those who are already better off. Now, of course, these bills don't actually say, we think we'll take from the poor and give to the rich. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but when you read them carefully, that's actually what they're going to do, and so we think those are a bad idea. So, best bill of the session, State Bill 16203. This is one, that tax expenditure stuff that we were talking about earlier. This is a bill that was going to require the Assembly to actually be more thoughtful about the tax expenditures. I like that. Worst bill of the session, State Bill 16067. This was going to give your favorite people, your cable operators, tax exemptions for the property they used, and it started out by saying, we want to do this because there's 3% of the population that doesn't have broadband. We're really worried about them. And then they wrote this bill that was going to give them a tax exemption for all their property, no matter whether they used it for that 3% or for anybody else, or whether they already had whether it was new or whether they already had it or anything. So that was totally ridiculous. And here's honorable mention. This actually was the head of the president of the state senate. It was his bill. This was a bill concerning a state sales tax and use tax exemption for historic aircraft on loan for public display. Were any of you aware that was a pressing public crisis? No, neither were we. This was some weird deal to help a museum in Colorado Springs, and Senator Cabin kept saying, well, you've got all these World War II veterans with their whatever those World War II planes were, and we want them to be available to the public, and they can't afford to do that. And then you got a bill that gives the subsidy to planes built as recently as 1981. Well, I'm sorry, they weren't used in World War II, so their historic value is somewhat. So this was really, and the only reason this was probably the most absurd bill, but it wasn't the winner in the worst bill category because its impact was so minimal. Right. So overall, sorry.
Did it pass?
Yes. Yes, I think the I don't remember about the broadband, but the playing bill definitely passed. I mean, because come on, it's Senator Cabinet. You know, we actually, one of our people did testify, but one of the things we noticed, of course, one of the things the students learn is that the public testimony, while it's required for every bill, usually they decided beforehand. And so we don't think we have much impact bill by bill. I do think actually we have a marginal impact though overall in the sense that I think the legislators understand that they are being held to a slightly higher standard. That they do run the risk of incurring some ridicule if one of our students actually shows up. And I think that's sort of on the outside of their thinking. I don't think it's prevented too many outrages, but at least they feel a little more self-conscious when they do something insane. And so here, legislative report card, final grade B-, curve generous. Exactly. If I was curving this the way I was curving in class, I would never have gone above C+, but even I was somewhat mindful of the sort of strategic considerations in terms of engaging the legislature constructively, and so B- was the number we went with.
So, and these were all bills that were considered? So
Yes.
Not just ones that passed?
No, because all bills were considered,
consideration.
and it was in their original forms.
Okay.
So, because they do evolve over time, and sometimes in the right direction, but it was just too much work for us to hunt that down. So we started with, this is their original forms. All right, so what does all this mean for you guys? This is what you say you do. This is right from your website. And here, uncertain future climate externalities. We like that. Investments in science, environmental policy externalities. We like that too. Investments in science and technology. That's a little trickier. So, from our perspective, basic science is a public good. Basic science that doesn't have immediate commercial applications, that's a public good. And the government has a very strong responsibility to support that, but also a very strong responsibility to make sure that it is public. So, for example, the fights that are being held, they're taking place in the biomedical field over journal publication of government-sponsored research. The journals publish the government-sponsored research and they have a copyright over the document. No, and no. If the government paid for it, that should be publicly available. And there are very important voices in NIH that agree with that, but there are very important lobbyists who are contaminating the House or the Congress to fight that. If we pay for it, it should be ours, right? And the only reason we should be paying for it is if it's truly a public good, if it's basic and is needed to support the further development of commercial applications. Should we be paying for commercial for activity that is commercially applicable? And the answer to that is no. No. If it's commercially applicable, there's a private sector that should be more than happy to do that. If the private sector doesn't want to do it, then maybe it's not so commercially applicable, and there's no reason why the government should be the funder of last resort for scientific activities that are not promising enough for anyone to put their own money down. Doesn't make any sense. All right, so I give you sort of 80% based on your mission statement, not knowing exactly what you mean by the science and technology stuff. Looking at the individual stuff, we'll go through this quickly. Basically, you guys are doing okay, right? Potentially addresses negative externalities, good. Potentially addresses negative externalities, good. Potentially addresses negative externalities, good. Good. Little trickier. This fire mitigation thing. There are lots of private actors here and lots of private incentives to get the mitigation right. And before I got the government involved, I want to understand if the private incentives somehow weren't actually working. Because you got to understand, who cares most about my house being burnt down? Should be me. Now, it's true that I may not think very much about how if my house burns down, it might mean the next house burns down as well. But my insurer should be thinking about that, as should my mortgagor. So, whether or not. So before we get too deeply involved in government activity here, I would like to understand how the private incentives are really working, and I'd like to have some demonstration that they were not just insufficient, but also not modifiable so as to be sufficient before I get the government involved here. I mean, you chose to live there, there's a fire risk, I'm not entirely sure why we should indemnify you for that, and I feel the same way, of course, about floodplains. Caribou migration routes. If you're going to put your tent in a caribou migration route, I think, I don't know if the government should rescue you when it gets trampled. I just don't. All right, so, but, we're close on that one. Yes, there you have it, for duty and humanity. Thank you. Anybody, extra credit, where does that quote come from? For duty and humanity, come on. I'm looking at the older guys. Three Stooges. This is a Three Stooges episode. For duty and humanity when they're doctors. For duty and humanity. So that's it. Thank you.
I can say just on the end alone that your presence is holding us to a higher standard, so that's great.
I'm glad. I'm really glad. I mean, as I said, you're way up in the A- range. So you're doing way better than the assembly. That's how I said assembly. And just keep these things in mind. That's important.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we've run ourselves out of time. I can imagine that folks have extra questions and things, so are you
I can hang around for another 5 or 10 minutes if people want to, sure.
Okay.
But don't feel obligated. Obviously, we all got stuff to do. So if you need to run off, I appreciate the attention you pay to me. It's really very gratifying.
Thank you. Final pressing questions from you all, or do you want to just engage individually?
I just had a general question with your students. How often do you confront conflict, in your own discussions? I mean, are you only using this kind of theory as the primary basis, or for example, what if one of your students just loves World War II aircrafts?
That's fine. They can pay for it. Yeah. No, in the course, I hold them very strictly to these reasonings, and it doesn't mean that their affection for these planes is irrelevant. It just means that fine, you can pay for it, right? Whether or not you like them, if the principle by which government works is it does whatever any of us likes, that's just absurd, right? So there is conflict in the sense that most of my students, I had a student come back several years ago from testifying and said, I got finished testifying and one of the legislators said, it was really nice to hear a conservative viewpoint coming from a student at CU Boulder. Am I conservative? I didn't mean to become a conservative. And actually that's a little overstated. There are a lot of what we do, a lot of what we find ourselves addressing are points that, there are some points that have very clear ideological anchors, right? So gun control, you know which side is which on that, right? But for example, these subsidies to businesses, ideologically that's very fluid, and neither the right nor the left has neither of them have a coherent ideology under any circumstances, right? But not only that, the ideologies are not nearly comprehensive enough to cover a lot of the stuff that goes here. So you'll find, what seems like the identical bill being sponsored by the Democrats one session and the Republicans the next session. It just depends on who's been bought by who, right? And so it's very fluid. But my students they all come away with a diminished sense of what appropriate government behavior is. So they all come in with what you might think of as the sort of conventional misperception about, government should fix it, government should fix that, government should fix me, whatever. And they all come away having backed off that a little bit.
Justin, you have a question?
Yeah, I was kind of curious with the notion of a public good and how it seems like within a lot of these debates or discussions, how you define something as good might be different for a lot of different people. And so, kind of maybe is there sort of like a uniform view about how human kind of the ends they're seeking or something that's built into this?
No, what's built into this, the public good is simply, if I consume it, you can too, and my consumption doesn't affect yours. So like radio waves, broadcast TV, those are all public goods.
Yeah, but that's in itself a viewpoint. That's
I think of that as an axiom or a positive. That's a public good. Now the question whether the public good is something that should be promoted or not, that's arguable. Right? So you could certainly imagine saying, look, yes, I understand that TV is a public good, and so if we broadcast TV, everybody gets it, and so forth. But I think TV rots the mind, and we shouldn't have it. Right? That's a discussion whose outcome is not predetermined from our point of view. What is predetermined from our point of view is that the regulation of television is an appropriate domain in which for the government to act, because it is a public good, and therefore private actors could not be in a position to regulate it or provide it appropriately. Mm-hmm. The question of whether we should have more of it or less, like national defense, the question of whether or not to have more or less, that's an open question. But the question of whether or not the government should discuss the question, that's open and shut. It's the government that should do it.
All right, well, thank you again. One
What
final question.
have you looked at the ballot initiatives for the election?
Personally, I have, yes.
But not as a class?
No, it's not a cycle. The class meets in the spring. And
Okay,
all
okay, I didn't, because it would be interesting what you.
Yeah, I have personal views on all of it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, which are very much, which are very much driven by my thoughts here,
Right.
but have not in front of the class, no. I wish I could make more of this class, I really do. You can imagine it doesn't scale, because it's, because the grading, the intensity of the grading, I grade 1,200 pages of papers, of course, and I grade them carefully, because again, these could be public documents, so, but I would like, for example, to give boot camps for new legislators in the fall. I would love for the university to help me do that. It's got, the deans know that I do this and they think it's kind of cute. But, and I think they're quite happy for me to invest as much of my effort as I want to in it, but it really hasn't gone beyond that. So no, we're not monitoring them full time. We're not Nate Silver. It would be fun to be Nate Silver, right? But we're not.
Is it usually just econ students, or do you get a broader?
They're pretty much econ students because in order, you have to have a certain level of economic sophistication in order to engage this material with the appropriate depth. So John Logan, for example, was not an econ major, but you could just well have been, and would have been our top student. So you've got to get through our intermediate theory courses in order to just be able to think in at this level of sophistication. So it's not as if you use any of that formal rigor in your papers because you're talking to the legislators, but you got to have an intuition that's that well developed.
Well, thank you for coming along.
Very